What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new episode of DC and RC. I'm Daniel Cormier. That's my boy Ryan Clark out in New York City for the Breakfast Club, doing the pivot again. That's my guy, Ryan. How you doing, brother?
Man, I'm doing good, brother. How was your trip over that way, bro?
17 hours. It was a nightmare, bro. Don't matter how comfortable you are on the plane, 17 hours is absolutely ridiculous. I'm exhausted, but duty calls, and we got a show to do. We missed last week. I missed doing the show. So we're back at it. And guys, coming up on the show, we got to talk about last weekend, Jairzinho, Rozenstruik, Volkov situation. Then we preview UFC 275 this weekend. And Ryan, when you start thinking of Valentina Shevchenko and her returning, you think of dominant champions. So we're going to rank our 5 most dominant champions in UFC history. And then we always got to tap in and tap out. But Ryan, when you look back to last weekend, right, and Rozenstruik gets stopped in the first round, in the way that he did, it once again points to a bit of an uncertainty that's going on in fighting right now from the officials all the way to the judges. It seems like the game is a little out of whack right now.
Well, I think the thing is, DC, we are trying to get to a point as UFC continues and as MMA or mixed martial arts continues to become such a well-respected sport. I think they're trying to take away some of the human cockfighting, as Dana White told me it used to be when I talked to him, when we did the pivot. And so I think they're trying to make it safer, but in this situation, you have a fighter who is obviously stunned, and Herb Dean is in there, and he's closer to the action than we are. But I'm used to seeing a fighter give an opportunity or have an opportunity to get himself composed, to grab a leg, to attempt a takedown, to try to ball up in some way and protect themselves. And I don't feel like Rozenstruik was given that opportunity. Was he dazed and was he phased and was he fading out of the fight? Absolutely. But one thing about the UFC, one thing about mixed martial arts is we've seen great comebacks with guys having been in trouble. We've seen guys that have been in trouble and got the knockout in the exact same round they were in trouble in. And so for me, if Rozenstruik was going to go to the ground, if he was going to try to protect himself, if he was continuing to take ground and pound or to take strikes while he was on the mat, I think that's one thing. But I also think he should have been given the opportunity to fight himself or fight his way out of that situation he was in against Alexander Volkov.
The craziest thing is that Herb Dean's the best in the business. He is the absolute best in the business. And there are a lot of instances in which Herb makes mistakes because there are mistakes to be made in fighting. And when I looked at the fight, I thought immediately that was quick, right? Because it seemed as though Biggie Boy was turning to kind of run away to try to find some space to recover. But you got to remember, there's some fights back in the day, even all the way back to Brock Lesnar, Shane Carwin. Shane Carwin destroyed Brock in the first round. Brock came back and submitted him in the second round. And that's just one that pops off the top of my head. But when you watch the fight happening and you watch finishes happen, you kind of think that at times the officials will see who's fighting. Because as a fighter myself, the one time that I was getting finished by Jones in Anaheim, they gave me ample opportunities to get back up. I just didn't have it in me to get back up. But the reality is I had time. So you took some damage on the way down there, but I would not have preferred it to happen any other way. So I can understand the frustrations of Rozenstruik, but he was hurt, man. He was hurt very bad. He got stunned. His body reacted in a weird way. And then he started to get hit with some follow-up shots. And you could see Herb kind of trying to maneuver his way into position to whether stop or not. And ultimately, he stopped the fight. And it leads to disappointment on one hand. But on the other hand, man, you got to give credit to Alexander Volkov. Because for a guy that has struggled at times, he comes back out there and he gets a win over a guy in Jairzinho Rozenstruik that many people thought that he would have trouble with. And if you look up at the screen here, you see the first statement that Rozenstruik made after the fight. Obviously disappointed, but it won't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing for me, DC. You can tell after Herb Dean makes the stoppage or stops the fight, it seems like Biggie Boy actually kind of came to. And, I was watching as I was watching the broadcast, he said, yeah, he was definitely out. He was definitely dazed. Even when he walked away, I think it was John, even when he walked away, you could see that he wasn't necessarily in his right mind or didn't have his wits about him. But it did seem that he was immediately disappointed because he felt he'd have an opportunity to fight himself out of the situation he was in. If you are Rozenstruik, or if you are a fighter who feels like they've gotten an early stoppage, how does that affect you, DC, especially in a sport where when you are trying to fight your way back into championship contenders or championship contention, one loss could be huge and dropping you down the ranks and keeping you from getting that opportunity to fight for the belt?
It's massive. It's massive. The stakes are huge every time you go out there because the reality is every single fight matters and means so much. It's like you don't have time to build into anything. It ain't an 82-game NBA season. It's not 17 games now or 18 games in the NFL. So it's like you really got to be ready to go and win right now every time. But the thing is, a lot of times fighters have to take responsibility also for putting themselves in that situation. Because for as good as Rozenstruik is, he seemed a little cautious. He was a little slow to start the fight. So a little bit of that is on the athlete also. It's not just on the official. Because it is a very, very difficult job. And that's one of the things that I'm having to kind of watch myself on, is that you have got to be aware and really present in knowing that these are human beings. And Herb Dean is making a decision on the fly, watching one guy get hit by another dude that's 6'7". Big, huge dude than Volkov that's 6'7", and he's battering him around the side of the octagon. So it's hard to say, well, it was unwarranted, but it's always the visual of after the fight is stopped when the guy jumps up and he starts running around and he wants to like make it seem like he wasn't necessarily hurt. So that's what happened with Rozenstruik. But when you look at Alexander Volkov, right, he always seems to put himself back on the fringe of being a contender because when he gets into the high-profile spots, he has seemed to falter. But what does this fight do with Volkov winning over Rozenstruik?
Well, you know what's the good thing for Alexander Volkov? He got in a fight with another striker. We saw him in London against Tom Aspinall, and he was truly dominated in that fight, DC. And I think not only does it matter that fighters lose, I think the way in which you lose is also something that the rankings or something that the matchmakers pay attention to. And to lose to Tom Aspinall in that way, in convincing fashion, in a submission in London, he needed to come back and show that he's a guy that can fight some of the top 5 guys and be a contender. And I think he's put himself back in that conversation with an emphatic knockout win over Jairzinho Rozenstruik. But we also have to think, DC, where does he fit into the heavyweight rankings or into the heavyweight championship belt picture when we've just seen him lose to a guy like Tom Aspinall who will fight Curtis Blades here going in the future? Does he deserve a top 5, Alexander Volkov, that is, a top 5, top 6 fight after this win over Biggie Boy?
You know, the crazy thing about Volkov is he's been on the cusp so many times. You know, when he was beating up Derek Lewis in 2018, and then Derek knocked him out at the very end, and then Derek fought me for the belt, that was supposed to be Volkov. If he had continued to win, he won 13 minutes and 55 seconds of that fight, then Derek knocked him out, maybe 14 and a half. But he's always kind of come up a little bit short in those massive moments. I don't know what's going to happen to and what happens for him going into this winning this fight. I don't know if it puts him right back, because now you're finally starting to see new names at the top of the heavyweight division. He's one of those guys that since coming over from Bellator, he's always kind of hung around the top. So he doesn't really, that win I don't feel warrants him jumping back up too much, because if you looked at the billboard from a little bit ago, Biggie Boy has been struggling a little bit since he initially burst onto the UFC scene and really made a statement in his debuts. But now he's been struggling, so it's a little bit difficult to propel him too far when he beats a guy like Rozenstruik. But honestly, Ryan, on Saturday night, that was a great fight. That was a big win for Volkov. But you know who I was most impressed with? I was most impressed with Movsar Evloev. The guy was, 16-0 now, 6-0 in the UFC. And most importantly, he beats Dan Ige, right? And we have seen Dan Ige, a very tough hung around the top that has made it all the way up to Calvin Kattar, was on the short list of title contention for a little bit, but he got beat. Now he finds himself fighting against Evloev, who beats him in a way that we don't see with Dan Ige. So my question for you is, the excitement when you start to see these young prospects start to pop in and make themselves known to these divisions. And I'm not talking about just him. I'm talking about him at the forefront, but everybody in the game right now that seem to be making that push towards beating these longtime veterans.
Well, we always have the gatekeeper conversation, right, DC? And you always say, you don't want to put yourself in that position, but we're seeing some of these young fighters get those opportunities against the gatekeepers, like we saw Evloev do this weekend, and it was dominating. The wrestling, the grappling was dominating. The physicality in which he fought with on his feet as well, I thought helped him to win that fight in convincing fashion. And I also love the way he chose to use his call-out opportunity, to call out a guy like Arnold Allen, who had just beat Dan Hooker, right? And Dan Hooker moved back down to 145. So to get those two young guys with an opportunity to face off, contrasting styles, contrasting techniques, but both very young, very exciting fighters, I think that's where these divisions are moving to. And we're seeing some of the old heads, I'll call them the older heads, let's not call them old heads. We're seeing them get opportunities to face these young, explosive mixed martial artists, and some of that energy, some of that youth, some of that strength, that explosion is winning out. But I do have to pay some bills first, DC, so you chill out over there in Singapore, man. I know you laid around in your bed on the plane for 17 weeks, but I want to talk a little bit about YouTube TV. With YouTube TV, watch live TV like cable. You can get started in minutes and watch the NBA Finals live on ABC. And without long-term contracts or hidden fees, YouTube TV lets you stay up to date with real-time stats and highlights of your favorite teams. YouTube TV, everything live TV should be. Try it free. New users only. Terms apply. Cancels apply.
I love YouTube TV. I got to be honest. I got it in my crib. I got cable. I'm one of them dudes that like TV so much that I'm
you got
paying for
everything.
all kind of stuff that I don't even need to be paying for. I mean, this is crazy. I got to do better, man.
Hey.
I need to do something to get rid of some of these reoccurring bills I got.
Well, I'll tell you what, DC, another thing that you're going to be streaming is ESPN Plus, and you'll get an opportunity for UFC 275 there. And we get to see a light heavyweight battle for the belt with Glover Teixeira and Jiri Prochazka. Listen, this is a fight, DC, that if you're Glover Teixeira and you're getting your opportunity to defend your belt for the first time, this is a dangerous man. This is a man that is explosive on his feet. He has strikes that could end the fight at any time. What are you most excited about in seeing Glover defend his belt for the very first time?
I'm excited to see how he deals with the puzzle of Prochazka, right? Prochazka's different. Prochazka come out there, he throws everything at you. He's got that weird haircut. He's just a little bit of a different cat. And he has burst on the scene now. That's the thing, man. It's like we don't have 10 years, 5 years of research on Jiri Prochazka because he's been doing a lot of his work overseas. But what we have seen from Jiri is that he has handled great wrestlers before. He beat my boy Muhammad Lawal, King Mo, back in Russia before he came over. He has fought many good wrestlers before and beaten them. But he has not fought a guy like Glover. The one thing about Glover Teixeira is, with experience is so much knowledge, right? There's so much knowledge in the experiences, even if at times they didn't go his way. So when he got beat by Jones in his first title fight after winning 18 in a row, getting beat by Gustafsson in the way that he did, having to deal with Rumble Johnson where he got beat and deal with all those disappointments, that all allowed for him to rebuild himself, set his focus on becoming the champion. And look at him today. Glover Teixeira, what he did to Jan Blachowicz, that was not a competitive fight.
Right.
We had just seen Jan Blachowicz beat Israel Adesanya. So he's a tough fight for Jiri, as Jiri is a tough fight for Glover. But for as dangerous as this fight is for Glover Teixeira, immediately after he won the belt, RC, he went right to the back, told Jiri, you're the next guy, you get the title fight. Hats off to Glover for stepping up to that challenge. It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be an extremely tough fight, but it is really cool to watch a fighter like Glover Teixeira continue to improve, continue to get better, and finally get over that hump. You mentioned some of those big names that he had an opportunity to fight on the way to this destination. The journey wasn't always one that he was putting one foot in front of the other and continuing to ascend up the ladder. He had his adversity, he had his losses, and now he's the champion. When you look at how he's improved, DC, and is now the champion, I have a question for you. For so long, the light heavyweights were ruled by two men, John Jones and then Daniel Cormier. And are we looking at a light heavyweight division that is better because they don't have that long-standing champion? Or is this a division that you believe is down, and that's why Glover Teixeira can now be the champion?
I don't think it's down. I think that what Glover has done has been just tremendous. And as you spoke to his journey, RC, that's why so many people were happy for him when it happened. It wasn't a knock on Jan Blachowicz, right? I remember doing the show after he won the belt, and you were smiling ear to ear because you were so happy for a good guy that finally made it to the top. And that was the sentiment across all of mixed martial arts because of who Glover Teixeira is. But I don't think that it's because the division's weaker. I think that it's just a matter of not having that dominant champion that is recognizable. You know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I believe in the dominant champion. I believe in the long-reigning guy. I believe in the guy becoming the face of a division. The Israel Adesanya, Kamaru Usman, the Anderson Silva. I believe in that. I think that it opens more opportunities to elevate the sport. And I think Glover can do that. But now, Glover becomes a champ. He's on the cusp of, on the verge of his first defense. And he starts talking about the end game.
Yeah.
He starts talking about, it's almost over. I got a couple more in me. I don't know what brought that about. And I always question fighters when they start to look at the finish line before. I also question all athletes, right? Football players, when they start going, I'm pretty much done. I don't think it's the best. But here's the question. When you start thinking of Glover at his age saying, maybe I'm getting close to the end, what does that let you know? Does that make your ears perk up like, oh my goodness, this is not good from an outsider's perspective? Or do you kind of go, you know what, man, we just know when the time's the time?
Yeah, I think that's what I feel more than anything, DC. Both of us are retired athletes. Neither one of us can do what we used to do for a living. I mean, that's why we have so much fun doing this podcast, because we know we can't do what made us the money. We can't do what got us here. And I think we know when the end is coming. I tell people all the time, I retired in November of my last season. It didn't take me until February to know. Like, you could feel it coming. I knew it was too hard to get to Sundays or to get to Monday nights. And I didn't think that the reward was worth the fight it took all week to be prepared. And I think Glover is starting to see that. Whether you're the champion or not at 42, DC, you feel the bumps, you feel the bruises, you feel the toll that this sport, or that your sport, takes on your entire physical being. And then not to mention the emotional and the mental grueling task of being up to fight the way that he has his entire life. And so I think Glover is just starting to realize, you know what? I'm closer to the end than I am the middle or the beginning. And that can be a good thing, because now I think it takes away the fear. It takes away the fear of, will I ever win a championship? Will I ever get to the point to where I reach the pinnacle of this sport? Because I have reached it, and I reached it at 42. And so now if I do lose to a young guy like Jiri, or someone else does take the belt, I can sail off into the sunset knowing I got what I needed and I accomplished my goal. My question to you is, though, DC, with all of these things we're saying about Glover Teixeira, the way that he's continued to improve, finally reaching the mountaintop, how does Jiri Prochazka knock him off the top of that mountain? How does he win?
You know, it's a tough fight, Ryan. And the more I look into the fight, I realize that it is a tougher fight than maybe many originally thought it was for Jiri. Matchup, you start going, why would Glover fight that dude? That dude's so good, he's so dangerous. But when you look at the Volkan Oezdemir fight, Volkan had moments against Jiri. When you look at the Dominic Reyes fight, guys, Dominic Reyes was not getting destroyed. Dominic Reyes was having moments. Dominic Reyes was having success. But then all you can remember is that spinning back elbow that ends the fight. and it resonates so strongly that you forget about everything that led up to that point. There were many moments in that fight in which Dominic Reyes was doing really good. So for Jiri Prochazka, he has to stay solid, he has to go forward, he has to be diverse, and he has to be tricky in there with Glover Teixeira, and he has got to defend. Because the one thing you don't want is Glover Teixeira on top of you early in the fight, dry, because he's super heavy. If you look at Glover, his bottom half is huge.
Right.
He's got big old legs, he's got a big old ass, and he gets on top of you and he rides you and he works you over on the ground.
DC,
so it's
only
like you
you
cannot let Glover take you down early. Pause.
DC,
Pause.
Please
Sorry,
pause that.
Pause.
Hey, only you would say a man has big legs, a big butt, and if he gets you on the ground, he's going to ride you. Like, only you.
Oh, my God.
Only you. Hey, only you, bro, would say that. I was like, oh, my gosh, what is he doing? I hope he doesn't coach his wrestling kids like this.
It's exact. But, bro, it's the most true thing, though. He gets on top. He floats the position. He really rides. Like, you get on top and he's riding you like a horse. I mean, whatever.
Guys,
you're an idiot.
This is like a time we just need corporate Jake to come on the show, man, and just get our lives together in a much better way. But also too this weekend, along with Valentina Shevchenko, we get a rematch of, at least to me, one of the greatest fights in UFC history. Joanna is back. We'll get to see her against Zhang Weili. I remember watching this and getting to the end of the fight, and even though Joanna is like unrecognizable by the end of this fight, she stood toe-to-toe. They stood in the middle of the octagon and just flat out went at it, DC. I'm so nervous that I'm too excited for the rematch, that I'm going to be expecting the fireworks that we saw the first time and that we won't get them. That we'll get two fighters who understand how dangerous their opponent is, and they sit back and they fight a little smarter, or they fight more cautious. What are you expecting from these two great former champions?
You know, very rarely does the rematch live up to the original, especially when the original is that explosive. Think Jurassic Park. And then getting into Jurassic Park.
Bro, you do that every time.
World,
why do you hate Jurassic
terrible.
Park so much?
Hey, I love Jurassic Park, but I'm just saying as a sequel, that was the worst sequel of all time. Anyways, so I did a detail on this fight, right? Because it was so good. And as you spoke to, it was the ebbs and flows of the fight. It was so even, it was so well matched, but there has to be adjustments. Now, Jedrzejczyk has been away for a long time, and she's been doing a lot of business outside of the octagon. Zhang Weili has been fighting. Zhang Weili has been in there with the best of the world. But here's the problem. Joanna has been able to go back and make the adjustments, because there are things that she does over and over, Ryan. As she became the champion, as she became the Boogie Woman, she did things over and over. And Zhang Weili was able to counter those things so beautifully. Joanna does a great job with a front kick every time. Weili would move it off to the side with the left hand, blast her with the right hand. That's why she ended up getting the hematoma. She has to change that. She cannot fight in that pattern anymore, or Zhang Weili's going to just do the same thing. Now, we know when you look at Weili, she is the most athletically gifted fighter across all female fighting. And I don't doubt that for a second, even if she's lost. No one has more athletic ability than Zhang Weili. This is an evenly matched fight. It's a great fight. It's going to come down to adjustments, though. If Joanna Jedrzejczyk can make the adjustments, if she can do in the dark what was necessary, it will give her an opportunity, especially with Carla Esparza as the champion right now, because it could not be better for Joanna Jedrzejczyk or Zhang Weili having a new champion atop this division.
Yeah, you know, you look at this division, I think what we got to see in Phoenix, Arizona, changed the entire landscape. And I don't just mean because the championship belt switched over to Carla Esparza. I mean, I think people perked up and said, okay, I can beat her, right? If you're Joanna, you've already beaten her. And so I think that the excitement of this division has now changed, and that's why this fight is so important. But I think back to football players, DC, who have these these collisions over and over again, whether you're a running back that's continuously hit, or you're a safety or a linebacker that's continually having to take on players in the hole, it changes who you are, right? After a while, it wears on you. If you're a fighter and you're in the type of war that we saw these two women in the first time, how does that change you as a fighter? Or can it, or does it change you?
You need time. You need time, Ryan. Now, and I'm speaking from experience, right? One of the most tough and difficult fights I ever had to go through was against Alexander Gustafsson. That was in October. I didn't come back until July. I was like, I need time, because you are much more aware of who you are and your, honestly, mortality in the octagon after a fight like that. You're just like, man, that was dark. It gets really, really dark when you're in there with a person that is as tough and as gritty, and honestly is as stubborn about victory, right? Not everybody's as stubborn. I think a lot of times that's what it boils down to. You get into the dog days, the dog moments of the fight, and you being stubborn, saying, this is my victory, is what's going to carry you. And when you get in there with someone that's just as stubborn, that's just as good, you really need time. And Joanna has taken time. Zhang Weili hasn't, though. She's been active because she feels like she is still the best in the division. Obviously, she went on to become champion after beating Joanna. So it does change you. It makes you very aware of who you are, of your life, honestly, inside the octagon. It makes you feel mortal. Whenever you're in there, you're bloody, you're all beat up. Luckily, I was able to win, but I don't know what it would feel like if you go through that and you get beat. So Joanna Jedrzejczyk got beat and had to deal with all the swelling. Her head looked like Hasim Rahman, bro. It was crazy.
Yeah. You know what's the crazy thing, though, is you think back to that fight, and her forehead is like the lasting memory of what that fight was, of how brutal it was, of how violent it was, of how hotly contested it was. And you mentioned mortality, right? You mentioned that your fighting mortality comes to the forefront whenever you go through a war like that. Someone who honestly seems almost immortal in the cage is Valentina Shevchenko. Like truly, like, we've seen her look mortal 2 times inside the octagon, and that was fighting Amanda Nunes. And those were the 2 most, highly contested fights we'd seen Amanda Nunes in as a champion, at least until she was beaten by Juliana Pena. She is ultimately dominant, right, at 125. Is her dominance, though, DC, or how does her dominance affect the sport? Is it good for the UFC? Is it good for mixed martial arts that, let's be honest, very few of her championship defenses have even been competitive?
Like I said, I am a proponent of the long reigning champion. I think that it's better to have someone that sits atop the world for a while. I mean, and I point back to boxing. Maybe I'm making a bad comparison, because I think back to Mike and Lennox and Floyd and Canelo, and everybody recognized them as the best. And I think that's what you get with Valentina Shevchenko. She is the most dominant fighter in the UFC. I mean, Habib was, obviously. And I know it's a cheap plug at Habib, but since he's gone, there's no one like the Bullet. She is the most difficult challenge for anyone in the division. But I do believe that this weekend is going to be one of the toughest fights that she's had. Ryan, let me tell you something about this woman, man. This woman, bro, is an absolute killer. We had a press conference in Los Angeles a few years ago, and we're all going through security. Bro, she walked in and she had like a half shirt. You know how she's all ripped?
Yeah.
Bro, she walked through security with a knife, son. She had a knife in her pants. She had a knife on her hip when she went to the thing. I was like, wait, is that a knife? Bro, Valentina Shevchenko had a knife, bro. It was just on her hip. But I think everybody was so focused on their abs that nobody recognized. She went through a metal detector with a freaking knife on her hip. Dude, she's a savage. She's an absolute savage. I love the Bullet.
Hey, I'll tell you what, I don't want to fight her, period, but especially if she got a weapon, because there's no chance to beat her. But do you think, or do we, DC, see an upset this weekend of Valentina Shevchenko? Do you think that's even possible?
You know, Taila Santos has really showed an ability to beat just about anyone. Just about anyone. Fought good fighters to this point and look relatively dominant. So when you look at Santos and her skills, her size, bro, she's big. She looks like one of the women that if she needed to, she could fight at 135 pounds. And with Amanda Nunes, that was part of the reason that Valentina struggled. But Santos is very well-rounded. She's so good on the ground. You know, when she fought Jillian Robertson, and she was able to dominate her on the ground. When that's what Jillian was known for.
Yes.
She's been able to beat people on the feet that are known for stand-up. She is truly a special talent. She lives in the world where Valentina lives, though. So in those moments, you got to level up if you're going to get that victory. You know, you talk about your best friend now, Juliana Pena, right? She leveled up to beat Amanda Nunes. She knew it'd be difficult, and so she leveled up to go and get her. That is what Santos will have to do if she hopes to get a victory this weekend and become the UFC flyweight champion.
Well, you know, when you think about dominant champions, especially currently in the sport, Valentina Shevchenko is one of those that comes to mind immediately. But since we're talking about dominant champions, DC, we're going to do a list. I'm going to ask you to not cheat, DC, because I'm the dominant champion of list on this show. So, since you had to take the long flight, you're over there working very hard. I'm going to let you go first, DC. Do not cheat, bro. Please.
I'm not.
5, bro.
I'm not cheating. Listen. I'm not cheating. But here's the question, though. Are we in combat sports history or just sports? Because I had to send 2 lists last time.
Sports history.
In sports history. Okay. At number 5, undefeated, 50-0, Floyd Money Mayweather.
Okay.
Dominant. I mean, beat everybody. The reason Floyd's so low, though, is because people at times accused him of cherry-picking fights. Fighting Canelo when he wasn't ready, doing those types of things is why I put Floyd way down at number 5. Number 4, Serena Williams. When Serena Williams was on her game, when Serena Williams was at the top of the world, nobody could compete. She was winning the Grand Slam as if it was something normal to do. And winning a Grand Slam is once in a lifetime if you're lucky. Serena was doing it like it was just another day in the park. At number 3, I'm going with Jordan. 6-0, 6 finals. Okay. Jordan at number 3. Yeah, Jordan's a man, right? Every time he got to the championship, he won the championship. But let's not forget, and this is one of my biggest arguments with everyone that always argues Jordan. Jordan didn't play in the NBA for 6 years. Jordan played many more years, and there were years in which Michael Jordan lost. But every time he got to the finals, he won. Jordan at number 3.
Why are you hating? Right? Why are you hating?
I'm not hating on Jordan. I love good Jordan. Things. I'm not, dude. I love Jordan. I'm just saying though, because that's the argument with everybody, bro. Anytime I try to say something like, "Hey man, LeBron's getting pretty close," I'm like, guys, listen to me. Jordan played more than 6 seasons in the NBA. We cannot ignore that. At number 2, please let me finish. Tiger Woods. Dude, he changed the game. He changed golf. Nobody watched golf before until Tiger Woods became that guy. We played Tiger Woods PGA Tour. You did everything to be in the Tiger Woods business. 16 major championships. Guy just wins. And even at his age now, after life-threatening accidents, Tiger Woods comes back. We all still tune in, hoping for that day where he looks like the guy that we recognize. And at number 1 is Brady. 7 Super Bowl championships. It's unheard of, man. Nobody wins 7 Super Bowls. Brady did. And Brady's number 1. I don't want to make Brady number 1. I really don't want to make Brady number 1. But his dominance has been second to none.
Well, here's what I'm going to say, DC. That's actually a very good list. I normally would hate on your list if it was a bad list, but it's actually an excellent list. It's probably going to be the second best list we hear on this show today. So, because I can't really disagree much. Now, I have a change at number 5 from what you have at number 5. At number 5, I'm going to go Michael Phelps. I think what Michael Phelps did for swimming, at least for me, was much like what you see with Tiger Woods. Now, DC, I can't even float. I can barely tread water. I can swim enough to stay alive. And so to see him be as dominant year after year after year. And I think the one thing that amazes me about Olympic athletes is this. You only get every 4 years, right? And if you're not on your game in that 4th year, if you're not at your peak, you don't get Olympic gold. And so for him to be as dominant as he was over that time period, to me is amazing. At number 4, I did go Floyd Mayweather. I agree with you. The record speaks for itself, and I do understand that people say he cherry-picked a little bit, but the bottom line is this, and you are a combat sports Hall of Famer, DC. You know it takes one punch, and in your sport, it takes one kick, one submission, one anything, and you lose. The 50 people they put him in there against, or he chose to go in there against, he beat them all. You cannot take that away from him. At number 3, I'm actually going to go with your number 1, and I'm saying Tom Brady. Tom Brady is the GOAT of the NFL. He's the GOAT of football. He's the greatest quarterback to have ever played, the greatest career we will ever see. Not we have ever seen, we will ever see in football. To come back now at 45, and for people like me, for people like Daniel Cormier that love the sport of football, to still know that this dude is good enough to win a championship. This dude at this age is the Randy Couture of football. He can win it at 45, right? At number 2, I went Michael Jordan. Yes, DC, I hear the bull stuff you're saying. Oh, he played 13 years, DC, in Chicago. I don't count the Wizard days. He played 13 years in Chicago.
You gotta count the Washington days. You gotta count the Washington days.
He was an owner, bro.
It doesn't matter. He averaged over 20 points a game. He averaged 20 points a game in the NBA.
DC, that just speaks to his greatness, but we can't count that against his championships. 13 years in Chicago, the man won 6 championships. That's DC. He dang near won a championship every other year. When you look at it, like you can't count those against him. Michael Jordan, number 2, and my number 1, I think was actually maybe your number 4. I can't remember it. Was Serena Williams, and is Serena Williams. To me, the most dominant tennis player of all time. And it's not only how often she won. It's in the ways that she won, in the ways that she changed our perspectives of what tennis greats can be and can look like and can play, and the power in which she played with. We also have to remember Serena and Venus's dominance as doubles partners as well. I think Serena Williams redefined what a tennis championship player looked like and behaved. And I think for me, that's why she's number 1.
Can we agree on like a number 6, Usain Bolt? Like neither one of us put Usain Bolt, which is actually crazy. I just thought about the moment you brought up Michael Phelps, I started thinking about Usain Bolt. I was like, man.
But DC, that's the other thing though. Like you look at how dominant he was, the records, he was able to break. He still didn't do that over as long of a period as Michael Phelps. And that's where it gets really hard when we're talking about these Olympic athletes. Think about Simone Biles, right? So Simone Biles now has moves named after her, right? They started to judge her differently when it came to events in gymnastics. And so I think when we are talking about some of these individual athletes, when you look at guys like, like yourself, you even think about Kamaru Usman and what he's starting to do, at welterweight, what John Jones was able to do. It's so hard to really just pick 5 dominant champions, especially when you bring in team sports as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When you start to list that, because there have been so many great athletes around the sports world that just making that list is fun because it allows you to kind of go into things that we don't talk about normally on the show. Yep. But Ryan, I got a bill to pay too. You know what I'm saying? So as you paid a bill a second ago, it's time for me to pay a bill. And guys, guess what? When you're about to have sex, isn't it all about confidence? Sometimes it's stress, anxiety, or a bad day can affect your performance and ruin fun for both of you. Well, it's Blue Chew to the rescue. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in a chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets help men combat all forms of ED. Because Blue Chew is an online prescription service, there are no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. And it ships right to your door in a discreet package. The process is simple. Sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part? It's all done online. Blue Chew's licensed medical providers work with you to find the right ingredient and strength for your prescription. Don't like swallowing pills? No problem, Ryan. Blue Chew's tablets are chewable. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the United States and they're prepared and they ship direct, so it's cheaper than a pharmacy. And here's a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our code promo DC at checkout. You'll pay only $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code DC to receive your first month free. Ryan Clark, Blue Chew hooking up these dudes. I'm gonna say this right now, y'all. I don't really, you know what I'm saying, right? I don't really, you know. I like Blue Chew, you know.
Bro, I am not. Hey, you are on one today, dog. We cannot let you get on a plane for 17 hours ever again. I'm so through with you right now. Corporate Jake,
Dude,
please. Corporate Jake,
because-
please, let's tap in and tap out, man.
All right, guys. A big discussion following UFC 274 was in regards to the scales. Dustin Poirier has come out and said the UFC needs to change all scales to solely digital. So DC, tap in or tap out on UFC moving to digital scales only?
Tap in. This makes no sense that they're not using digital scales yet. Because that doctor scale can be messed with one way or the other, right? Like you can either move it lighter or you can move it heavier. A doctor scale is too inconsistent in that type of situation, but I do understand why they do it, right? I understand the visual because look at it, right? We've seen this the entirety of our lives. When fighters step on the scale, they flex their muscle and you got the scale right in front of them. So I get the visual, but it's not necessary in today's world. Get a digital scale.
No, I agree. I tap in on the scales going digital. And I think also we have to look at where a lot of these guys try to weigh themselves before the weigh-in to know if they've cut the right amount of weight. A lot of those scales are digital as well. And you want those things to be able to match up. It's much easier, and I believe it takes out the human aspect of what these scales now do when we have to make sure it's balanced out. I think to me that's the easiest way to do it. It's the surest way to do it, and there's too much riding on these fights for anything to be left for chance.
All right, guys. Last week, former UFC lightweight Paul Felder said that Beneil Dariush is the biggest threat at 155 for Charles Oliveira due to Beneil's different kind of grappling. RC, tap in or tap out on Dariush being the top threat to Do Bronx?
You know why I'm going to tap in? Because I know what DC is going to say. I tap all the way in on this. We got to stop trying to rush Islam Makhachev to the opportunity to fight for a championship just because he shook DC's hand and he's friends with Khabib. That's right. I'm going in. Me and Felder already know it. Beneil Dariush is the biggest threat at 155 right now to Charles Do Bronx. I said it, DC.
I love Benny D. I love Beneil Dariush. I really do. But that's asinine. It's absurd. This dude, as Paul Felder, has now tried to become too smart for his own good. Paul Felder's smart. But Paul now at this point, Paul Felder has now actually outwitted himself by saying that. Maybe he was just talking and he didn't realize what he was saying and he went too far down the path to bring it back. But the biggest threat to Charles Oliveira is Islam Makhachev because, and I will tell you what my jiu-jitsu coach told me. He goes, if Islam and all those guys went to Abu Dhabi, ADCC, all those things that Charles does so well at, they would all do well. They would all place. They would all medal. They may even win. These guys are fantastic grapplers. Islam's the greatest and the biggest threat. Corporate Jake, let's not waste any more time on nonsense. Jake, no more nonsense, please.
That's a great question.
No nonsense.
Great question, Jake.
Okay. A top 10 bantamweight matchup between Marlon Vera and Dominic Cruz seems to be in the works for later this summer. Vera is coming off a main event victory, while Cruz is riding a 2-fight win streak. DC, tap in or tap out on Chito Vera versus Dominic Cruz?
I think I tap in. It's a good fight. It's time to see if Chito Vera can truly make his way into title contention by beating Dominic Cruz. And if he doesn't, with Cheeto at number 5 and Dominic getting the win, now the former champion starts to make his way back into a title fight. It is crazy to me that Dominic Cruz, for all that he's accomplished, is not more in the conversation at bantamweight right now. I get it, he's 37 years old, but he was 24-4. And a lot of those years that Dominic Cruz have in his life weren't spent competing. He was injured. He's finally been healthy for an extended period of time, and now he's ready to make a run. So yes, fight, and if Dominic wins, he should get back into the conversation.
No, I agree. This is a fight that's going to be exciting. Everybody always understands when a Dominic Cruz fights happen, we know we're going to see that awkward style that's so hard to catch up to. And now we're watching Marlon Vera continue to ascend up the ranks and to beat a guy that was a former champion and a dominant fighter in the UFC will set either one of these two guys up to make a run at the championship right now. And no matter what Dominic Cruz's age is, if you can still get in there and you can still compete with the top 5 fighters in the division, you deserve a chance to continue to move forward towards a championship bout.
All right, guys. Greg Hardy has announced that he is set to make his professional boxing debut later this fall after having a rather unsuccessful run in the UFC. So, RC, tap in or tap out on Hardy turning to a potential boxing career?
I tap out on it. And I tap out because Greg Hardy wasn't consistently getting submitted. Greg Hardy wasn't getting out-wrestled in the UFC. People was making him go night-night. And if you think that, if you thought it was hard to beat, some of these UFC fighters on their feet, what are you going to do when you're fighting people who only fight on their feet and have been doing it for an extended period of time? So I tap out on this all the way out.
Yo, hey, dog, you have never been so right. Right, you've never been so right. Like, I was actually gonna say the same thing. So I tap in because boxing's very difficult. But the one thing that he does have, though, is that he is a very powerful guy. Yeah. So if he can land, maybe he can put you out. But the reality is these guys are so skilled in the boxing ring. It's gonna be difficult for him to it's gonna be very difficult for him to catch up to these guys.
Yep.
All right, guys, one more. Monday morning, RC took to Twitter for what maybe is his hottest take to date, tweeting, Chris Brown is more talented than Michael Jackson. No nonsense. There, I said it. So, DC, tap in or tap out on RC's hot take.
Jake. I told you no nonsense, Jake. Jake, I told you no nonsense. Ryan Clark has lost his mind. Look, man, this is one of those Paul Felder situations, and I don't really get those vibes from Ryan, where you start to type something, and then all of a sudden you're like, maybe I shouldn't send the tweet. Should I press tweet? And then Ryan hit tweet, and then he goes and double downs on it. Puts a video of Chris Brown dancing, and I'm thinking to myself, he might actually believe this. But here's the problem. This is a bit of a recency bias here. We have not seen Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's been gone for a while. So he has not seen Michael Jackson for a long time. He forgets the greatness. It's so crazy how a guy like Ryan Clark, on one hand, can always hold Michael Jordan up so high, but then on the other hand, put down another one of the greats, the greatest entertainer of all time. It is not close. I tap out, and Ryan Clark has lost his mind.
I tap in, and here is what I'm going to do for you, DC. I'm going to explain it to you, and after I explain it to you, you're actually going to agree. I believe that Michael Jackson is the GOAT. He is the greatest of all time. We will never see another entertainer take over the world the way that Michael Jackson did. Never see one have the career. I am simply speaking about talent. I'm simply speaking about skills. There is nothing. Let me repeat it again. There is nothing that Michael Jackson can do or could do that Chris Brown can't. You want Michael Jackson to sing? Chris Brown can sing. You want Michael Jackson to dance? Chris Brown can dance. You think Chris Brown can't go remake the Thriller video? He can't do that choreography and crush it? Come on. Now, I ask you this though, DC. Here is what I ask you. You ever seen Michael Jackson play basketball? Chris Brown could play basketball. Did you ever see Michael Jackson while he was dancing flip? Be acrobatic? Chris Brown can do that. We ever see Michael Jackson paint? Chris Brown can paint. You ever hear Michael Jackson rap? Yeah, rap was out while Mike was old. Chris Brown can rap. Michael Jackson can't do none of those things. No. You are. DC, Michael Jackson is Tom Brady. He's the greatest of all time. You know who I think is more talented than Tom Brady? Aaron Rodgers. And I'm right. This is the same thing. Michael Jackson is the GOAT. Chris Brown is more talented. The end.
But you want to talk about basketball. You talk about basketball and all kind of other stuff. I don't agree. I really don't. I still don't agree because I think it's asinine. You're ridiculous. You know what's crazy? I was actually going to say this Saturday on SportsCenter, they had you up there. The sum of the Clark is out there. You saw, you say, hey, man, I don't belong up there with the rest of these mugs talking about fights. But I was going to say, you know what, Ryan, you do. But then you go out and you say some crazy stuff like this. And now I'm taking all your cred back. All your UFC cred, your street cred, your pop cred, your hip hop cred. Everything's gone after you say some stuff like that, man. It's ridiculous.
DC, it's the truth. It's the bottom line truth, DC. You cannot let the Hall of Fame go to your head and not hear your boy out. But listen, man, I am glad you were able to get on today. I'm enjoying New York. I'm having a good time. I can't wait to see you at one of these fights again soon. I'll be there in Vegas in July. Enjoy this weekend, man. Have a great time. Thank y'all for tuning in. I don't even know if the show's about to end yet, DC, so you can talk for a little bit because I am flabbergasted that you don't know that Chris Brown is more talented than Michael Jackson. Flabbergasted.
You're very talented. You're a very talented arguer. Like you could have been a lawyer if you had a different job because you made some good points. But the reality is we're talking about entertainment. We aren't talking about playing basketball. We're not talking about all the other stuff. But guys, like Ryan said, every single Tuesday, ESPN, YouTube, everywhere else you get your podcast, you can get brand new episodes of DC and RC. I'm Daniel Cormier. That's my guy, Ryan Clark, enjoying New York City. My man, keep on shining, my brother. Keep shining.
All love, brother.